Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping straight into something pretty critical. The skills you need in financial services right now and how they're changing.
That's right. We've got this big 2024 report from the Financial Services Skills Commission. The FSSC, they partnered with EY on this.
And we're mixing that with some really, candid stuff from data analysts on Reddit talking about what their jobs are actually like day to day.
Yeah, it's a good mix. The FSSC, well, they represent something like 300,000 employees in UK finance. Their whole job is figuring out the talent pipeline, what skills are needed.
So you get the big picture from the report, the EY analysis.
Exactly. And then the Reddit stuff gives you that, on-the-ground reality check.
Okay, so our mission for this deep dive,
Yeah.
we want to get into the skills that are really in demand, find out where the shortages are, look at how things like AI and net zero are shaking things up.
And crucially, what it's actually like working in data right now.
Right. We want to give you a really clear picture of the skills landscape, especially around data analysis and what it means for you, whether you're in the sector or maybe thinking about it.
Sounds good. So where do we start? Maybe back in 2023. What did things look like then?
Yeah, good starting point. The FSSC report says, okay, recruitment pressure eased up a bit from the year before, but it was still, challenging.
How challenging?
About 3 in every 100 jobs were unfilled, which is still pretty significant.
Okay. And were those specific types of jobs?
Definitely. The report calls out data roles, software, cybersecurity, risk management. Those were still tough to fill.
The usual suspects then.
Pretty much. But interestingly, product managers got added to that list in 2023 as well.
Ah, that makes sense. Sort of bridging the gap between the tech and the business side.
Exactly. It really points to that shift towards digital, towards security, and needing people who can manage those products.
And the weird thing was, this was happening even though there were actually more people applying for jobs, right? And people were staying in roles longer.
Yeah, that's the fascinating part. More candidates, lower turnover, but still couldn't find people with the right skills in those key areas.
So it's not just about bodies and seats. It's about having the right capability.
Precisely. The report even mentioned that PwC survey where CEOs were worried that tech skills gaps were actually stopping them from transforming their businesses.
Right. It becomes a real bottleneck.
So looking forward, the FSSC has this framework 13 future skills, they call it.
The core things the sector needs going forward.
Yeah. And the headline is, demand for almost all of these skills is growing faster than the supply.
No huge surprise there, I guess.
Yeah.
Which one specifically?
Well, this is where it got really interesting for me. You'd think technical skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
But actually, behavioral skills, things like empathy, coaching, communication, they saw the highest growth in demand. And the gap between supply and demand there got much wider.
Wow. Okay, so the soft skills are becoming harder skills to find.
Kind of. It suggests you can't just be technically brilliant. You need to be able to, work with people, lead teams, understand clients. Those are becoming premium skills.
That really changes the picture, doesn't it? Technical skill isn't the whole story.
Not at all. Look at the numbers. Adaptability, that's a behavioral one, had the biggest overall gap, 38%.
38%? That's massive.
It is. And then for technical skills, yeah, the gaps were big too, but slightly smaller. Machine learning was 34%, cybersecurity 33%, still huge shortages, but adaptability topped the list.
So machine learning, obviously key for things like fraud detection, risk, cyber, well, that's self-explanatory. But adaptability being number one.
Tells you something about the pace of change, I think.
Definitely. But, okay, just having some supply isn't enough, right? The EY data brought in this idea of proficiency.
Exactly. This was a big point. Just because someone has a skill doesn't mean they're good enough at it for what the job needs.
And the number was pretty stark, wasn't it?
70%. 70% of skills in finance have a proficiency gap, meaning lots of people have the skill on paper, but maybe not at the level required.
Wow. And that translates to, what, about 16% of the workforce needing upskilling in at least one area?
That's the number.
Yeah.
So take data analytics. You might have people with the title, but are they really proficient? Can they actually find the deep insights? That's where the gap offer is.
So it's a quality issue, not just quantity.
Right. And the biggest proficiency gaps, data analytics and coaching.
Interesting. Even though there's a decent number of people who say they have those skills.
Exactly. Lots of people with basic or intermediate skills, but not enough experts.
That really hits home, like you said. We see data analysts everywhere, but maybe the real bottleneck is that deep expertise.
Yeah. Whereas for skills like empathy or teamwork, The proficiency gap itself is smaller. But
Hmm.
because so many people have those skills already, even a small gap means a huge volume of people needing a bit of upskilling just to keep sharp.
Got it. So different types of challenges depending on the skill.
And for the super technical stuff, machine learning, cyber,
What about proficiency there?
generally good among the specialists. The problem there is just there aren't enough specialists to begin with.
Right. So for those, it's more about growing the overall talent pool, getting more people into those specialist roles.
Precisely. Okay, so that's the high-level view from the reports. Now, let's get into the weeds a bit. What are the data analysts on Reddit saying about their actual day jobs?
Yeah, let's ground this. What's the reality on the ground?
Well, okay, scrolling through those threads, you see a lot about the basics. Data entry, data cleaning. That seems to take up a surprising amount of time for many.
The unglamorous side.
Totally. Plus, creating and maintaining reports, building dashboards, and, yeah, lots of meetings, no surprise there.
Standard stuff. You need clean data to do anything meaningful, and you need to communicate the findings. Makes sense.
But the cleaning part,
Oh.
one user, Trotty99, talked about the constant frustration of dealing with, well, they called it crap data from different business units.
Huh. I bet many analysts can relate to that.
They said every time they looked at data from somewhere new, they found new quality issues. It's a battle.
Yeah, that points to a bigger issue around data governance, doesn't it? Consistent standards across the organization. Or lack thereof.
Definitely. And another theme was just constant learning on the job.
The field moves fast.
Right. Spodiopi mentioned relying heavily on Google, Stack Overflow, online resources to solve problems. But crucially, they stressed understanding why a solution works, not just copying code.
That's key. The difference between just doing tasks and actually understanding the context, adding strategic value.
Yeah, and automation came up too. In Good Time 23 talked about automating how they collected data on call center agents.
Make sense? Free up time from the repetitive stuff.
Exactly. Focus on the harder analysis. Being able to spot those automation opportunities is a valuable skill in itself.
And it reduces errors too.
True. But maybe the biggest challenge mentioned over and over was communication.
Yes. Explain complex stuff to people who maybe don't get it or don't want to get it.
Precisely. Random User had this story about sales execs blaming the data when their numbers looked bad.
Oh, classic. The data must be wrong.
Exactly. So being able to translate findings clearly, handle resistance, that seems absolutely critical.
It really is. You need to be a bit of a data translator, a storyteller even.
Yeah. And Mordsith 187 described juggling tons of regular reports plus ad hoc requests, needing serious organizational skills. And Ben Maggs was frustrated by people just calling everything data and ignoring basic database principles.
So it's not just crunching numbers, it's project management, stakeholder management, even advocating for better data practices.
It really sounds like it. And in terms of tools, Lamb of God 0492 mentions SQL, that's database language, and BI tools for visuals. Python and R seemed more company-specific.
Standard toolkit for many analysts.
But ultimately, one person pointed out, you provide the data-driven recommendations, but whether the business actually acts on them, that's another story.
A dose of realism there. Your analysis is only as good as the action it inspires.
So digging into those challenges a bit more, what are the specific frustrations? Big Larg mentioned management often not knowing what to ask for. No clear requirements.
Yeah, that's a killer. If you don't define the problem properly up front, you're kind of set up to fail, or at least waste a lot of time.
Right. And the inconsistent data thing came up again and again. Plus, different stakeholders arguing over how to define metrics.
Oh, the metric definition wars. Fun times.
And Muguar J. Trust 3 talked about the thankless task of fixing other people's messy data constantly.
Yeah, the data janitor role nobody signed up for, but everyone ends up doing. It really highlights the need for that data governance we mentioned.
Totally. And then there's the feeling of constantly having to explain the basics. That was Shorecraft's point. And Big Larg again on the struggle to get non-technical people to actually trust the data or the analysis.
Building that data literacy and trust across the organization is a huge ongoing challenge.
And ARPA Monster had this slightly sad story about building amazing interactive dashboards.
Only for the execs to ask for a PDF.
Exactly. They preferred static reports. It shows that disconnect that can happen.
Yeah, sticking to the familiar, even if it's less insightful, it's a barrier.
Okay, so that's the reality check. Now let's flip it. What makes a great data analyst? Beyond just the tech skills, Forbes had an article on this looking towards 2025. 6 key traits.
Right, the soft skills that are increasingly essential. What's number one?
Being a keen observer. Noticing things, patterns, not just in the data, but in the business itself. Connecting the dots.
So context is everything. Makes sense.
Second, asking great questions. Being curious, probing assumptions, digging deeper than the surface requests.
Getting to the real question behind the question.
Exactly. Third, being resourceful and finding or even creating the data you need. We know data can be messy or missing, so finding ways around that is key.
Yeah, data wrangling and acquisition. Super important.
Fourth, preparing the data. That cleaning and organizing we talked about. It's not glamorous, but vital for accuracy.
Garbage in, garbage out, right?
Right.
Data prep is crucial.
Fifth, discovering key insights. This is where the tech skills meet business understanding and, well, curiosity, finding what really matters.
Yaha moments.
And finally, sixth, sharing those insights effectively. Telling a compelling story with data, using clear visuals. Because if people don't understand it or aren't persuaded, the insight is wasted.
Communication again. It keeps coming back to that. And the article stressed these are learnable skills, right? Not just innate talent.
Yeah, absolutely. They're skills you can develop. And they're what lifts someone from just being competent to being really impactful.
Bridging that gap between the numbers and the business outcomes.
And this lines up perfectly with what the Reddit users were saying about soft skills too. And DOX talked about understanding the underlying need, not just the stated request.
Digging deeper. Active listening. Empathy.
Right. What happened mentioned persuading stakeholders about your methods. Sophisticated, fun, stressed tailoring communication, avoiding jargon, focusing on business value.
Know your audience. Speak their language. Focus on what matters to them.
Feng Xianfu highlighted just clear, basic interpersonal communication for getting requirements right. And Zero Wunder, the ability to state conclusions firmly, even if the analysis was complex.
Confidence and clarity.
Yeah.
Important.
And Tramit mentioned meeting diplomacy when pointing out data quality issues. You can't just say, your data is terrible.
No. Tact is required. It all paints a picture of an analyst needing really strong people skills alongside the tech.
Definitely. Okay, what about getting promoted? Moving into senior roles, there was a Reddit thread on interviewing for those.
Interesting. What did they say?
Well, existentialists said hiring managers ask functional questions, specific tools like Google Analytics, SQL, how you use them, specific techniques like A/B testing you've done.
Makes sense. Checking the practical application of skills, the track record.
Yeah. But a hiring manager chimed in anonymously, saying for senior roles, they look for more. Like, can you anticipate questions from different departments? Marketing versus product, for example.
Thinking more strategically, anticipating needs.
Right. And they said soft skills, team fit, problem solving, clear communication of the synthesized data, often way more heavily than just super deep tech skills at that level.
So the well-rounded candidate becomes more important.
And Sadoil 2577 said honesty about your skill level is appreciated. Don't oversell.
Good advice for any interview.
True. They also mentioned storytelling with data again, giving clear examples of projects, the impact they had.
Show, don't just tell.
And another hiring manager shared a key interview question they use.
Oh yeah, what was it?
Basically, describe a business problem, how you turned it into an analytics project, how you explored the data, what insights you found, and what the business did as a result. The whole end-to-end process.
That's a great question. It covers technical skills, problem solving, business sense, communication, impact, everything. Really gets to the core of their capability.
Okay, final big area. How are the huge trends like AI and the move to net zero affecting skills demand?
Yeah, the landscape keeps shifting. What did the EY report say about AI?
Mostly viewed as supercharging human ability, augmentation, not just replacement, freeing people up from routine stuff to focus on innovation, client relationships.
That's the optimistic view. Any counterpoints?
Well, yeah, they mentioned a BCG study suggesting AI output isn't always better, and it could even reduce diversity of thought if we rely on it too much. So critical thinking and human oversight are still vital.
And ethics, accountability. Those were highlighted too.
Absolutely crucial. And interestingly, government data suggests financial services will be hit harder by AI than other sectors. And it's the highly skilled roles analysts, account managers potentially seeing more impact than customer service.
So professionals in those roles really need to adapt, learn how to work with AI.
That's the takeaway. AI is driving demand for data and engineering skills, obviously, but also for those behavioral skills, again, coaching, teamwork, and especially adaptability.
Adaptability keeps popping up.
It really does. And what about net zero?
How's that changing skills needs?
It's creating new demands, too. Better communication skills for talking to clients about sustainability, strategic planning that actually builds in environmental factors, and of course, expertise in climate-related data and metrics.
Right. Understanding climate risk, green finance opportunities.
Exactly. And the report says lots of firms are investing in training for this stuff. Sustainability is becoming core business.
Good to hear. So, are all these efforts to build skills actually working?
The FSSC report suggests they are having an impact. There's increased supply in areas like data analysis, digital literacy, so progress is being made.
Still work to do on the proficiency gaps we talked about.
Definitely. The report stresses that. But it gives some positive examples, case studies of firms doing good things, NatWest focusing on empathy and leadership, M&G training in AI and data analytics, Tesco Bank building agile skills internally.
So, different approaches, but a clear focus on upskilling.
Yeah. And most firms recognize the value of a strong learning culture. They see the link to productivity, employee satisfaction, retention.
But there are barriers, right? What stops it?
The usual suspects, really. Lack of time for employees, motivation, maybe leadership not fully backing it, budget constraints, not knowing what training is available, and crucially, psychological safety. People need to feel safe to learn and make mistakes.
All significant hurdles to overcome.
But the trend seems positive. More firms are trying to forecast their skills needs further ahead, and they are increasing learning hours for staff.
And what about reskilling? Moving people into totally new roles.
That's gaining momentum too. More firms are doing it, and they're seeing more people successfully reskilled. The FSSC even points out the cost savings cheaper than recruiting externally. Plus, you keep good people.
Makes good business sense.
Yeah.
Invest in your own talent.
Right. So the final message from the FSSC is pretty clear. Make skills central to your strategy. Get better at forecasting what you'll need. Invest in building those skills, upskilling, reskilling, recruiting smartly, and collaborate across the industry.
A clear call to action for the sector.
So wrapping this up, it's obvious the skills landscape in finance is, well, it's dynamic, always changing.
Yeah, the gaps persist, but they're evolving. Big emphasis on both tech and behavioral skills.
Right.
Data analytics, empathy, adaptability are huge.
And proficiency is just as important as having the skill in the first place. That really came through.
Definitely. Some key aha moments for me were those big proficiency gaps in data, the high demand for behavioral skills, hearing the real-world struggles of analysts.
And seeing that the sector is trying to tackle these issues proactively.
Yeah.
So for you listening, whether you're deep in the industry, thinking about joining, or just curious about finance, understanding these skill shifts is really, really important for navigating your career.
It gives you a sense of the opportunities, but also the challenges ahead in this changing sector.
Okay, final thought to leave you with. AI is getting better and better at automating tasks. How do you think that balance between technical skills and those uniquely human skills, empathy, critical thinking, creativity, how will that continue to shift in finance?
And maybe more personally, what steps can you take now to make sure you stay relevant and keep growing? Maybe look up that FSSC skills framework we mentioned and see where you stand, where you might want to develop. Something to think about.